brand new shoes. She said, I love you, boy, I love you so. She said, I love you, baby, oh, 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 oh. She said, I love you more than words can say. She said, I love you, baby,
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you to take your seats, we might get proceedings started. My name is Professor Joe Eustace. I'm the director of the HRB Clinical Research Facility in Cork, and I have the privilege of being the chair of the senior management team of the HRB Clinical Research, CRCI, Clinical Research Infrastructure Ireland. On behalf of all my colleagues, you're very welcome to today's meeting. On one or two initial housekeeping notes, I'm asked to point out that while Paul Simon says there are 7 ways to leave your lover, there is only 3 ways of leaving this hall. We got one exit at either side of us, and we got the main entrance that we came in through. So in the unlikely event of an emergency, you choose your nearest exit, and you walk, and the assembly point is the entrance to St. Anne's Church, just up the road from us. I'd also like to point out the restroom facilities are adjacent to us over here. And for anybody who needs Wi-Fi access, you will find the Wi-Fi linkage under Events in Capital. There's no password, and all you need to do is to enter your email, and you should be able to access the Wi-Fi. So this is the second year that HRB CRCI has hosted this meeting. The purpose of it is to highlight the progress that has taken place in the clinical research infrastructure and conduct of clinical research across the country. It is also to introduce the many events that are taking place across the country for celebration of International Clinical Trials Day. Now, hopefully all of you, as you arrived, received a copy of the event calendar here. And I'd really encourage you to try to review this, to look at local events or events that you may be able to get to, and to support these events and to encourage colleagues to do likewise. Now, the theme for this year's meeting is Growing Clinical Research in Ireland Together. And again, that's a very apt theme. We have seen tremendous progress across Ireland with research infrastructure and activity over the space of the last few years. And yet, this is still very much an active process. We are growing. We're a long way from having achieved the ultimate goal of that process. And so we've all suffered from a late spring, but all around us at the moment, we see encouraging signs of growth. But if that early growth in clinical research is to succeed, it needs to be protected, it needs promotion, it needs adequate resourcing. And if we are to achieve anything like the potential that we have in Ireland to conduct patient-focused research, then there is no way that this is going to happen unless the level of funding that is provided by the government to the health research funding agencies and via the enterprise agencies in support of clinical research infrastructure, if this does not grow to meet the kind of levels that you'd expect in any of our European peer countries, then we're never going to be able to succeed in that opportunity. Now, clinical research is much more than just gathering data and analyzing it and disseminating the results. It's about rigorously undertaking those activities, doing it with precision and with accuracy. And before you can do that in clinical research, you have to develop adequate quality management processes. And there are many, many reasons as to why the government should support research, but one of the indirect, though vital ones, is that by the conduct of research, you raise the profile and the focus on quality within healthcare, an area which certainly has been topical of late. And the hope is that as we build on the successes that we're talking about today, with the promotion of clinical research, not only will all of this lead to better healthcare interventions, it will also lead to a better healthcare system. So when we talk about building clinical research in Ireland together, the other critical part of that is the togetherness. This is a collaborative process. And the successes that we've seen to date have only occurred because of a large and varied number of stakeholders coming together, working hard to achieve a common goal. And I think the breadth of stakeholders that are required to succeed in this is evidenced by our list of speakers today. And this is not only nationally, this is also internationally. I am particularly delighted to welcome Jack Demotz from ECRIN, the support of which has been vital and a huge assistance to us in HRB CRCI as we've gone about developing research processes in Ireland. Both their support and their patience, while Ireland has gone through the somewhat lengthy processes of achieving our national approvals to allow Ireland to join into the ECRIN-ERIC network, which again will be vital if we are to succeed in our long-term goals of promoting research of Ireland internationally. Equally, on the local level, much of our success has been the result of the direction and leadership that has been provided by the HRB. A lot of this, the infrastructure that is supported by that allows us to hold meetings like this, and without which is so important to get people together and to network. And so again, we're very much indebted to the continued support of the HRB in its funding of HRB CRCI and of the clinical research facilities. I'm therefore delighted that our first speaker is the Interim Director, Mairead O'Driscoll of the HRB, who I'll invite now to come up to the podium, and she'll address us about the strategy and funding initiatives of the HRB going forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Joe. It was a long walk up. So, it's great, actually, and thank you to be here. It's great to be here, and thank you to Fionnuala and Pat and Joe and the team at CRCI for organising this event every year. It's marvellous to see so many people, and every year we see growing interest in clinical research and in clinical trials, and I think that's reflected in the number of people who are here today. So this morning, what I want to do really is just to really take, I suppose, a bit of a stock take, and as Joe said, we have made a fair bit of progress. Tell you a little bit about where we are, what we've done so far, and just mention some of the key initiatives that I suppose are occupying the HRB over the next 12 months, and just to mention some things that you might be interested in getting involved in. So, first of all, just, I suppose, a very quick recap about the HRB. You probably know this already, but our mission, of course, is to improve people's health and to enhance healthcare delivery. And I suppose that sets us apart a little bit from some of the enterprise agencies. We do co-fund quite a bit. I know representatives are here from Enterprise Ireland, and we do a bit of co-funding with our enterprise partners as well. But our focus very much is on how we can use research and support clinical research and clinical trials to improve healthcare and to improve patient outcomes. So that's really our mission. And just as a reminder, you can see there a copy of our current strategy. We are about halfway through a current 5-year plan with another couple of years to go. But already we're starting to think about the next phase of funding post-2020, and I'll mention something about that in a minute. So in terms of where we are, I said we're about halfway through, and I'm not going to go back through all the objectives and so on that we have set in our strategy, because probably most of you know them and you've seen them already at various talks. But just to remind you again, how does this whole area of activity, healthcare interventions, trials fit into the whole? And at the moment, this is roughly in percentage terms how it's breaking down around our various different high-level goals. And you can see there, if you start around at the pink slice there of the pie, this sort of investigator-driven, addressing major health challenges, research projects is working at around 23% of our current investment. You can see if we go looking at supporting people, there is about 20%. That's around our career support and so on. We have specific research that's targeted at meeting the needs of the Irish health and social care system, about a quarter of our investment. A little slice there at the top is around enabling, so that's supporting infrastructure and policy-driven research and so on. But you can see there that nearly 30% at the moment of our investment is allocated to healthcare trials and interventions, and that includes the support for healthcare trials and interventions. So it's quite a significant slice of our investment, and that's a deliberate, I suppose, deliberate strategy that we set out to do, because we recognised that while we have built a lot of the infrastructure to support clinical trials, that we also need to invest in the activity as well. Now, that may change a little bit as we get towards the end of our strategy the next 2 years, and we certainly expect to see the career support piece picking up a little bit, because we have a number of schemes that we're rolling out. But nevertheless, you're looking at probably around 25% of our total investment over that 5-year period will be in healthcare trials and interventions. So what have we achieved so far? So as Joe said, we have made a lot of progress, and it's never enough, but let's just see where we are so far. We are continuing to support our clinical research facilities. We have a new round of investment that we're just announcing this year that will bring us up to 2021, and that's just over 11 million. HRB CRCI, of course, which has organised this event and is doing terrific work, has just secured second phase funding from the HRB and also from Enterprise Ireland. So that brings us up to 2021 as well. The Trial Methodology Research Network is a very, very important investment that we made, recognising a few years ago that it was important to look at how the methodology around clinical trials and making sure that that was up to date and appropriate, and that we had support for that at national level. So they also secured second phase funding. I just want to mention Cancer Trials Ireland. I know they'll be running their own event next week to celebrate clinical trials, but they are specifically mentioned in the new the National Cancer Strategy that was published last year, with a target to double the number of cancer clinical trials that will take place in Ireland between now and I think 2024. It's a bit of a challenging target, but nevertheless, it's very good that it's in there. And of course, we have a number of other clinical trial networks in disease areas as well. We have stroke, mother and baby care, primary care, and critical care. So quite a lot has been invested so far. So in addition to that, apart from, I suppose, the physical infrastructure and the networks, we've also invested quite a bit in healthcare interventions. So far, we've supported 13 healthcare interventions. We expect to spend about 20 million by 2020. We've also we're about to announce, or will shortly be announcing, a new round or new awards that are being made under the Interreg programme. They're supported by the European Regional Development Fund, and they're cross-border. So we're working with our colleagues in Northern Ireland around that, and we've 12 cross-border healthcare intervention studies that you'll be reading about soon, I hope. So that's all the activity. And then there's a lot of support work going on as well. The Corporate Enabling Clinical Research Group, this is a multi-stakeholder group being coordinated by CRCI. I'm sorry for all the acronyms. But they are looking particularly around governance and looking at things like contract issues and ethical support and all of those other issues that make it, I suppose, facilitate clinical research between hospitals and universities. And that's a very important piece of work, being led mainly by our universities and supported by CRDI. And the last thing I just wanted to mention in this list is support for the Irish Research Nurses Network. Now, as you know, and probably a number of you are here, clinical research can't happen without clinical research nurses. So they're absolutely the backbone of the whole system. And they have had some support over the years, but it's been a little bit, I suppose, uneven and a little bit sort of just one-off support for events and so on. So the HRB will be hopefully announcing shortly. This has to go to our board next week, so I hope I'm not preempting their decision, but I'm sure they will approve it. We hope to announce support for a 3-year programme of support for the Irish Research Nurses Network as well, to help them with their core activities, with training, and helping them to link into other groups around Europe and in the US and in the UK as well. So quite a lot has been done, and as Joe said, you know, we need more. Of course, we need more. But if you look at it all, I suppose we've invested, or will have invested by 2020, over 150 million. It is a lot, but nevertheless, it's really just a start. And of course, we were coming off a very low base, and we recognise that. So I suppose that's what we've been doing in terms of funding, but we're engaged in a number of other initiatives as well in the HRB, and I just wanted to mention these this morning because I think they're very important. So there's it's what we do, of course, but it's also how we do it. And there's a lot of, I suppose, talk, a lot of emphasis, a lot of things going on around Europe at the moment in terms of changing the research culture. And I think it's important that we're involved in that as well. I'm not going to, again, go into a lot of detail this morning about the work we're doing to encourage public and patient involvement in research. I know Mitchell will be talking about that probably later, but we have invested a little bit in that. I mean, that's been led by my colleague Anna Cody in the HRB. And that's really just recognising the importance of getting patients and members of the public involved at an appropriate level all the way through the whole research cycle, not just at the end, not just seeing them as subjects of the research, but actually as partners in the research, and we're trying to encourage that. There's a lot of work going on in Europe at the European level around promoting open science, and we've been to the fore in that as well, around fair training. That's about how data is used, accessibility, interoperability, and so on. We're also very involved in the research integrity agenda. So this again is looking at making sure that research and the way research is conducted in a way that meets proper standards. And we have a National Research Integrity Forum, which is being co-chaired chaired by the HRB. And the last thing I just wanted to mention under that was around a new publishing platform that we launched in February called HRB Open Research, and this is to try and encourage people to get the results of their research out there and into the public domain as soon as possible. And again, we have I see Trace Lynn down there in the audience. If anybody wants to talk to anybody about that, she's our in-house expert on all things to do with HRB Open Research. So that's all about the research culture and making sure that we don't just look at, investing in bricks and mortar, but we also look at how we actually conduct research. And just one more thing I just wanted to mention in the context of that, another group that we've been involved in, which is looking at value in research. It's called Ensuring Value in Research, EVIR. And this is about a number of organisations, a number of funding organisations from around the world that have come together to look at how we can increase the value of health research, encourage best practice in health research, and develop new approaches with a particular focus on clinical research. And you can see there I've listed the number of the organisations that are involved in that. It's been led by the NIHR in the UK, PCORI in the USA, and ZonMV in the Netherlands. And there are other organisations involved also, including the HRB. And what this group has done is they have come up with a number of guiding principles. There's actually about 10 of them, but I'm just summarising them here around justifiable research priorities. And again, that is around, for example, things like involving patients, healthcare professionals, and policy users in the research. It's about robust research design, conduct, and analysis, and I don't think I have to go into any detail or explanation around that. Regulation and management of research conduct, again, looking at things like ethics, good governance, and very importantly as well from the context of clinical trials, saying that all information and all findings must be accessible and that all reports should be complete and they should be published. And what that means really is that all studies must be registered, but also the outcome of trials must be reported. And you may be familiar with the work that's been done by a group called All Trials, where they're encouraging people to, well, they're going beyond encouraging people actually to publish the findings of all trials, whether positive or negative, and they're starting to call out and name trials and studies and investigations who haven't actually published the findings of their trials. So I don't think any of us want to be on that list, but it's all in the interest of transparency and openness. So overall, what they're trying to do, and that group is trying to do, and we're involved in this, is maximising the value of the research that we fund. And we're not just talking here, by the way, about economic value, though of course that's important, but the value to patients, the value to the healthcare system, and avoiding waste. Because we don't have limitless resources. We don't have enough resources, of course, so it's really all the more important that we use the resources that we have as wisely as possible. So one thing I just wanted to mention before I finish up, which is around something that we've just embarked on, which is a review of clinical research infrastructure in Ireland. Now, I mentioned at the start that we've invested a significant amount of funding in clinical research infrastructure, in facilities, in networks, and so on. And at this point, we'll be coming to an end, I suppose, of that phase of investment around 2020, 2021. And you might think, well, that's a long way away, but it actually takes a long time to put these things in place. We're also very, very conscious that there are gaps. We're only funding in certain places. For example, the HRB actually directly supports 3 of the 7 clinical research facilities in Ireland. So there are gaps around the country in terms of the physical infrastructure. There are gaps in terms of disease networks. We only have 5 at the moment. There are gaps around the support for multi-centre clinical trials and a number of other issues like protected time and so on. So we're very conscious of this. So what we want to do is take a step back, have a look at what we've achieved so far, and try and have a look and analyse where those gaps are, where the synergies are there any duplications, what are the needs coming up in the clinical research infrastructure system. And the idea of that is that will inform our strategic priorities post-2020. So we're involved in that at the moment. It'll take us about a year, so we hope to publish that probably around February 2019. And a number of you, I think, in the room will be contacted shortly because we're getting a little bit of help with this, and you'll be contacted, I think, for input into that and given an opportunity, because we do very much see it as a partnership. Now, I think CRDI are also engaged in doing a review of clinical research as well in Ireland, and they'll be looking particularly at the enterprise side of things and what is needed on that. So we'll be obviously talking to them as well and staying in close touch. So I suppose really just to summarise, what are the key messages? We've made a lot of progress, as Joe said. We've made a lot of progress, I think, particularly around infrastructure for clinical trials and generally speaking in terms of clinical research. We know that we need more. We are going to continue to invest. We will be making announcements as the year goes by of a number of other investments, but we also know that more is needed. We want to, I suppose, turn our attention away from or I suppose expand our gaze a little bit from not just the physical infrastructure and the support for intervention studies. We want to look at how we work, looking at issues around governance, looking at integrity, looking at value. They're all very important issues as well. And I suppose, finally, we want to look at how we are investing, and that's what I suppose we're trying to get to with the review that we've just embarked on. Joe mentioned again the importance of outcomes for patients, and I think we all agree that there's a real need here to try and build a bridge between the academic system and the healthcare system. The question is, how do you do that, and how can we work with partners, work with yourselves, to use the investment that we have to actually facilitate that and to make that happen. So that's going to be, I suppose, the focus of a lot of our attention over the next 12 months. And, well, somebody will come back next year and hopefully tell you how we're getting on with all of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mairead. In the interest of time, I think we're going to keep questions till the question and answer session at the very end of the meeting. I'm next delighted to welcome Dr. HRB CRCI, which again have done tremendous work in organising this meeting as well as all the other activities that she's going to talk about. Fionnuala.
Thank you very much, Joe, and welcome everybody, and thank you all for coming. We're delighted to see you all here in such great numbers again this year. So we are meeting today in this historic venue, the Round Room at the Mansion House, where almost 100 years ago, on the 22nd of January 1919, the first Dáil met. The events of that day were carried out entirely through the Irish language. Now, we won't endeavour to do that today. Well, I certainly won't, unless anybody else would like to try. But we are coming here together with a similar purpose of collaboration to improve Ireland's future, and this time in the area of clinical research, as our theme suggests today, of growing clinical research in Ireland together. Over the course of my few slides that are coming up now, I'm going to give you an update from last year. We're now just 3 years in operation since the 1st of May, and I'm going to talk to you about the progress that we've made, particularly over the last year, and I'm going to highlight some of our ongoing and future activities across the entire network. Okay, so this slide is one that you're probably familiar with, and I have borrowed it from the team in the HRB, and it is their jigsaw slide. And this slide, as we know, is a growing slide and reflects the investment over the last 10 years or so by the Health Research Board and national governments in our infrastructure in Ireland for clinical research. You can see where we slot in the middle of all of that. We're up here as HRB Clinical Research Coordination Ireland, and we're very much there as a connecting piece in this puzzle, and we serve as the central point of contact for clinical research across Ireland and across the network of clinical research infrastructures that are there. You'll remember this slide also from last year, but if you can spot, it's actually grown. We've had to whoosh our circles over as we gladly invited and welcomed the NCRC in Crumlin to join the partnership of CRCI throughout the year. So we have our centres across all of our centres, the directors of which all form the senior management team of HRB CRCI, and now we have included Crumlin into that group. We have other good news. Limerick will soon be joining us, and they're there down for joining us around June this year. I think we have some of the team from Limerick here today also, and we very much look forward to working with the team in Limerick as part of the partnership in CRCI. As you know, we're funded through the Health Research Board, through Enterprise Ireland, and Clinical Research Development Ireland. And so I thought, I often get asked the question about all the different acronyms and what's the difference between CRCI and CRDI and how does it all fit in together. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take a moment just to explain how we fit in and where we sit in terms of CRDI. So Clinical Research Development Ireland, was rebranded and relaunched from Molecular Medicine Ireland last October by the Minister for Health. Pat is not with us today. Unfortunately, he's away out of the country this week, and I know he's sorry to have missed today's event, but he was very much the leader in the whole development of the new strategic plan for clinical research development Ireland, which was launched last October. This is just a snapshot of that strategic plan, and it just shows you the key areas of focus or the key goals for that group. And I'm not going to read through this, but you can see from this that it's very, very much focused. Clinical Research Development Ireland is very much focused on supporting clinical research, on supporting those who are trying to build the infrastructure, supporting those who are trying to deliver the research, supporting the whole education and training side of clinical research, building its capacity, and indeed acting as a strong advocate voice for adequate funding for clinical research. There are a number of different programs that run within the House of CRDI. So we have the ICAT program, which is the postgraduate PhD training program, and I think we have Karen here with us today. The Curum project, which is an SFI-funded project, has a link with CRDI, and we have Anne-Marie here who runs the education and training element for the Curum project from CRDI. We have iProspect and IPCOR prostate cancer research programs within CRDI, supported through the Irish Cancer Society. And indeed, as was mentioned by Marie, there's the Corporate Enabling of Clinical Research program, which Gemma and the team leads in CRDI, and that's very much looking at what are the problems for academic institutions around governance and sponsorship for clinical research, and trying to support and develop that. And then there's ourselves, HRB Clinical Research Coordination Ireland. And our role, as you know, is very much on supporting the network to deliver and attract more clinical research into Ireland, and to provide supports and coordination, and to act as a central point of contact for clinical research in Ireland. So I'm going to take a few moments now and to look back at the year and to highlight on some of the key activities that we have been involved in. There are many different activities, and we're growing all of the time into different areas, and there's lots of things we could do, and sometimes you kind of feel, God, that'd be great if we got involved in that, and you have to say, well, hold on a second, this is our brief and this is what we have to stick to. So the opportunities are certainly endless on what we could develop and grow into in CRCI. But just to remind you again, we have now got 7 centres, clinical research facilities and centres around the country. And the open trial sites, this is trials sites within each of our centres. When you add them all up, the numbers of trial sites, as opposed to clinical trials, are growing across Ireland and have been doing so over the last number of years. These centres are now very experienced centres with combined 67.5 years of experience across the centres in delivering clinical research. There are 209 clinical research staff, and many of you are here in the room with us today, and these are research nurses, data managers, research pharmacists, all of the people who are absolutely pivotal to the delivering of high-quality clinical research across our clinical research centres and facilities. These centres are working with 18 different hospitals around the country, so 18 of our hospitals are linked in with our clinical research facilities and centres to deliver clinical research to the appropriate required international standards. And 333 investigators are working as lead investigators, PIs, investigators involved in the clinical trials and running of these clinical trials across these centres. So you can see these numbers are growing all of the time, and this is a reflection of the infrastructure support that has been put in place over the years. Coming back then to HRB CRCI, and our role in all of this and connecting up the centres is to provide infrastructure for multi-centre clinical trials. That's what our network does. That's what the whole CRCI together. And I like to think of CRCI not as the hub central office, but as the network of centres together providing this infrastructure. We in the central office can act as a central point of contact, and a lot of our time is spent signposting off and directing people in the right direction to the individual clinical research facilities and centres and investigators who are ready, willing and able to run the clinical research. We support both academic and commercial research. A key focus of HRB CRCI is on quality, and we developed our quality working group very early on in our programme, because we saw the importance of making sure that whatever we do across Ireland is to the appropriate required standards internationally. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that as I give you some updates on some great work that group have done. And of course, the whole point in all of this is that we advance the care of patients through this coordinated clinical trial network, that we bring more trials to Ireland, that we give Irish patients and the Irish public better access to clinical trials, to medicines, to devices, to technologies at an earlier stage rather than when they get onto the market. So when we focus in then on what HRB CRCI actually does, we divide up our roles and services into two areas. Ones that we facilitate, so ones that we can signpost off to somebody else to do, and ones that we provide directly ourselves. And if you look at the 10 roles and services that we have, and you'll see these on our website, the top 5 are shaded in blue, and there's the ones that we provide ourselves. So we have signposting, directing people off, we promote, so we go around and we talk at a lot of conferences and events, and we talk about clinical research in Ireland. We provide advice and consultancy in all different areas of clinical research. We have indeed our online services on our website, which you can look at. And the whole feasibility programme, which is delivered through the team in the central office, which is led by Michelle Canan, and also by the facilitators who are appointed through the HRB CRCI grant and working in each of the clinical research facilities around the country. And again, I understand that a number of this team are here with us today. Then in terms of services that are delivered by our clinical research facilities and centres, which we facilitate but we don't provide directly, the study startup obviously happens on the ground in the clinical research facilities and centres. So we work with the team on the ground, we gather metrics in our recruitment tracking, and we help to support the early study startup of trials. Regulatory and ethics advice can be provided by us, but indeed it's often the best place for investigators to go is through their own local clinical research facility or centre, where experts are available to help them in all of the regulatory and ethical aspects of their clinical research. Auditing and monitoring is a service that can be provided again through our central office, or indeed out through our clinical research facilities and centres where skilled staff are available. And quality assurance then is always, of course, important across all of the centres, and it's run throughout all of the centres, but we coordinate centrally through our working group. And again, I'm going to mention a little bit more about that in a moment. So those are our key services, but I think probably the toughest part of work that we have to do is in the whole streamlining of processes and trying to improve systems for Ireland. So when you look at a system that's in place for years, or a system that doesn't work like it does in other jurisdictions, when you're trying to implement change and bring in new processes, it's very difficult, and that's probably the hardest part of the work that we do. Over the last couple of years, we've been working on the confidential disclosure agreement with the IPHA. We're quite close to having that across the line, but it's taken a long time, and it is a difficult process. But we feel that when we get to the end stage of that, where we have a more streamlined process for confidentiality agreement for Ireland, that we'll actually be a step ahead of other jurisdictions where they do it differently. The Irish Pharmaceutical Healthcare Association themselves have drafted a contract template for clinical trial agreements, and we're working with them on that, in the review of that, to make sure that it fits with the institutions and the organisations and the hospitals that will actually be signing to those contracts with the commercial companies. We have our different working groups, but the budget working group is looking at clinical trial budget element listings. People often talk to us about, oh my goodness, the cost of doing clinical trials in Ireland, and it's so varied at the different sites and centres, and can you do anything about developing an Irish costing template or standardising clinical trials? And there's work ongoing in this area, and again, it's not a streamlined, or it's not a straightforward process, and it will take time, but we are working in this whole area, listing out what are the individual costs that it does actually take to run trials in Ireland. And we've assisted the HRB with creating a checklist for clinical trial costs that can go with the DIFA applications. It's linked on the HRB website. It's also on our website for an academic investigator to think about all of the different costs that they would need to think about when costing for a clinical trial. And that's a link to it there. Most of the work that we do in HRB CRCI is done through our working groups. And so what we have done is that we bring and have brought groups of people together from around the country who are experts in different areas of clinical research. They're the experts, they're the people on the ground working together. And what we do is that we coordinate and bring them together in the central office to form these working groups, to collaborate, to share best practice and knowledge. Our 6 groups there's the quality working group, which is focused obviously on quality, and it's a team of QRAMs from around the country. The Study Feasibility and Startup Working Group are the staff who are appointed through the HRB CRCI grant within the centres and coordinated through Michelle in the central office. The Budget Working Group, again, people who are responsible for budget and costing around all of the sites. We have our Legal Working Group, and these are the group who are working on the confidentiality disclosure agreement for us and the reviewing of the IPHA contract. And indeed, we have the Public and Patient Involvement Working Group, and this is a group which is bringing together the information, the tools, the information that is already there and gathered for patient and public involvement, sharing it all in a central repository and making sure that we all have access to this information rather than reinventing the wheel the whole time. And we have a new working group on pharmacovigilance, and again, it's bringing the experts in the area together so that they can share best practice and make sure that we're not replicating and providing streamlined services across our networks. We also provide support to the SMEs in the medtech and device industry. And Enterprise Ireland have supported and funded the Clinical Industry Liaison Officer role for a number of years, originally within MMI, now CRDI. And when we came on board and joined the team, the Clinical Industry Liaison Officer role transitioned into HRB CRCI. And I think we have Fionnuala Gibbons here today, who was in this role for many years. Fionnuala moved on late last year, and we'd like to thank her for her great work down through the years. But this role was established to support Indigenous medical device and biotechnology companies in the development of new medical devices and diagnostics, providing guidance primarily on their clinical research needs, so as to help these companies and give them advice and to signpost them off in the right direction for their clinical research needs. The role provides a wide range of supports to researchers and companies, and it's a very wide brief, including high potential startups and established multinational companies. And the role also provided education programs, including GCP for medical device development and so on. So this role is currently vacant, but we will be advertising soon, so please watch this space. So I just want to take a moment to talk to you about the feasibility programme. And this is something that I talked to you about last year as well. So I really want to give you an update on where it's progressed to over the course of the year. You'll have seen this slide previously, and this shows you how the feasibility programme in HRB CRCI works. So we have a central point of contact, a central email address. Companies come to us with their feasibilities. They come directly to Michelle, and Michelle will process it and find out some information for them, make sure all the CDAs are in place. And then we process it through our network with the teams of people on the ground in each of the clinical research facilities and centres. And we feed back to the companies within 2 weeks of them requesting the feasibility from us in the first place. So to share with you where we've got to, these are the figures that were to the end of 2017. So 179 feasibilities came through our doors. 148 of them were processed through our office. 31 were sent on primarily to Cancer Trials Ireland, as at present we don't handle the feasibilities in the cancer arena. Of those 148 studies, Irish investigators expressed interest in 117 of those studies, and 31 they declined and said, you know what, those studies don't suit us in Ireland, you know, we don't have the right patient population, whatever the case may be. And that to the companies is often more valuable than waiting certainly for 3 or 4 months to get an answer of no. So the fact that we can deliver that answer up front is very useful and beneficial. 33 of those studies are now proceeding to the next stage of development, which is a 22% success rate. And you're expected to have a success rate of about 10% on feasibility. So we're obviously tracking ahead of that at present, which is really good. Of the companies who are using this service, there are 15 CROs, 15 pharma companies, and 6 clinical research networks. So there's a wide spread of people who are using the service and bringing their trials to Ireland. 443 Irish investigators so far have participated in the programme with us in CRCI. 334 of them have expressed interest in the 117 studies. That is, they've completed feasibilities in those studies. And this is across 34 different therapeutic areas. And so while we may have networks just funded in 5 areas with direct funding from the Health Research Board, there are actually a large number of therapeutic areas out there that we are delivering and have the investigator interest and ability to run clinical trials across Ireland, and we're doing so already. Behind the scenes, of course, is the IT system, and John McCourt leads the management of the CRF manager system for both our central office, for which we use to gather our metrics, but also for all of our centres. So John supports 7 centres and 110 active users on the system, and that's how we are able to gather the metrics across our sites, and it enables the centres to project manage their studies on site as well. One of the most important pieces of work that we delivered over the last 2 years was through our quality working group. And this is in the whole area of what we call the Mutual Recognition Scheme for Quality Management Systems. So our quality working group, our QRAMs from around the country, led by Fiona Craig and our team, developed what we call our Mutual Recognition Policy document of the clinical research facilities' quality management systems. So this was basically an A to Z of quality management systems as to what you needed to do. And we set a minimum expectations across 13 different categories, and this was finalised in June 2016. The clinical research facilities and centres then carried out a self-assessment of their management systems according to this policy in early 2017, and then a peer review process where our quality manager and quality managers from the centres went around to each of the centres and did a peer review visit throughout July 2017 to February 2018. The scope of Cycle 1 was restricted to HPRA-regulated IMP trials, but this whole process has been completed across 5 of our centres. And what this enables us to do is to be able to turn around and say, the quality standards in each of our centres are the same. They're to the appropriate recognised international standards, and they are validated and ensured to be to the standards that we require. This is a really important piece of work. This group will continue and continue this process, and it will roll out over the next couple of years and continue to be ongoing. And we'll also look to develop these type of mutual recognition schemes in other areas as well. We're very glad to have Jacques here, as Joe mentioned earlier, and we're very much looking forward to becoming members of ECRIN, hopefully this year. This is pending government approval at present. A memo has to go to Cabinet, and that's all in train, but these things take time, as we all understand. When this happens, the HRB will act as the national hub organisation. HRB CRCI will act as the national hub organisation for ECRIN. It'll mean that we will appoint a UCO, a European correspondent, in our central office, and this person will be able to link with the other European correspondents in all of the other countries that are members of ECRIN. I think what's most important in all of this is that we will be able to participate and contribute to all ECRIN activities as full members, and we very much look forward to doing that. There are a number of other different projects ongoing that we're supporting, and I'm just giving you a snapshot of it today. Geraldine is going to talk to you in a moment about more work that we're doing in the paediatric area. But PEDCRIN is a project which is H2020 funded. It's also in collaboration with ECRIN, and we in CRCI, through CRDI, are acting as the central point of contact for this network within Ireland. Colm O'Donnell, who's going to present here shortly, is going to talk about his pop art study, which is part of this programme, for which we provide supports to also. And then that brings me to my last slide, just to remind you that you can find out all of the information about us on our website and keep up to date on what we're doing. You'll get your GDPR email in the next couple of days to remind you to sign up to CRCI again, so that we can continue to contact you and provide you with our newsletter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fionnuala. It's a great pleasure again to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Jacques de Moats, who's the Director General of ECRIN ERIC. ECRIN ERIC, it simply is awaiting the Cabinet decision. It has to be included in a memo from Cabinet. If we get on and do that, we might support clinical research, join ECRIN, and Cabinet might have fewer other issues which should distract us. So we greatly look forward to that. And in keeping with that, Jack is going to talk about the European opportunities for collaborative research through ECRIN membership. Jack.
Thank you very much, Joe. So I'm very happy to be here today, especially because you celebrate, and I'm very impressed by the way the celebration of the International Clinical Trials Day is organized here. I must say that this initiative started at the very beginning of ECRIN, and we organized the first event, the first International Clinical Trials Day, so at the European Commission in Brussels in May 2005. Meaning 13 years ago. So I'm very impressed to see that the concept has spread and amplified. So I will give you a few. Okay. A few figures regarding the international cooperation in clinical trials. So this first slide is interesting because it shows that the clinical trials is an activity for wealthy country. Only the high-income country have a significant activity in terms of non-industry funded trial, and they have also some industry funded trial. There are some trials run by the industry in the middle-income country, but almost none in the low-income country. So this slide is also something important to understand what are the possible obstacles to international collaboration. If you consider on the left side the industry-sponsored trial, you can see that the industry goes for multinational trial in most cases, except in some interesting situations, because the industry doesn't use the international collaboration so in China, in India, in Indonesia, in the US, and in Japan, meaning that when the population size is very big, there is no need for multinational collaboration. If you consider now the right panel, you can see that for the academic trials, most trials are run in one single country. So this probably means that there are obstacles to multinational collaboration, and the exceptions are also very interesting, because here you have Puerto Rico, because they are eligible for the NIH funding, and you have New Zealand, because New Zealand has put in place a common system with Australia regarding the funding and the infrastructure. So it means that there is a deficit in the capacity to run multinational clinical trials, in spite of the need to access the patient and to access the medical expertise in all the different countries. And this, the two main obstacles are probably the lack of funding for multinational trials and the lack of common infrastructure. There are also some collaboration clusters. So Ireland, for instance, is here. Is part of the size of the dot represents the density of clinical trials, and there is one cluster for the non-industry funded trials in Europe, which is different from the Scandinavian cluster. The Scandinavian have this habit of working together. And if you consider now the industry funded trial, you can see that there is a Western European cluster, including Scandinavia, and an Eastern European cluster, which is different. And I think Ireland is here. And this is also something interesting. This slide reflects the mismatch, or the partial mismatch, between the burden of disease and the density of clinical trials in the different world regions. And you can see, you can see that for some conditions, especially for pediatrics and especially for infectious disease in the low and middle income region, there is a mismatch between the density of trial and the burden of disease, meaning that there are some conditions for which trials are missing, and this is another reason why there is a need for international collaboration. So I just wanted to show this in order to explain the reason why we were created as an instrument to promote multinational collaboration, at least in Europe. The mission of ECRIN is to be more or less the smugglers of non-industry funded clinical trials, meaning that we started with a series of projects, and we have been supported by the European Commission through a series of projects since 2004. Since 2004, Ireland joined the consortium in 2006, and Ireland stayed in the consortium until now. And in addition, in 2013, we were happy to learn that the European Commission and the member country decided to create an ERIC, which is an intergovernmental organization that was put in place by the Commission for the Research Infrastructure. This ERIC was created in 2013 and supported as an intergovernmental organization. And what we are waiting for now regarding Ireland is that Ireland should join this ERIC in the next few months, I would say. Regarding the organization, so the ECRIN is a coordinating body, meaning that we wouldn't be able to do what we are doing without our national partners. So we coordinate the activity that is performed by the national partners. We ask each member to establish a network of clinical trial units having the capacity to manage the trial in the country. And by coordinating the activity of multiple clinical trial units in multiple countries, we are able to provide support to the management of the trial. And to this end, we have not only a core team in Paris in charge of the general coordination, but we have very important collaborators in the different countries, 1 or 2 persons. There are some countries where we have now 2 or even 3 European correspondents. These people are really the interface between ECRIN. They are employees of ECRIN or delegated to ECRIN or seconded to ECRIN. But they are really the people in charge of interfacing with the national partners, and they are the people in charge of coordinating the activity performed by the other European correspondent when they are in the country of the principal investigator and the sponsor. So we have now 9 members and observers. We expect Ireland to join. We will have also Slovakia about to join in very soon. And yeah. Regarding the activities, so we have two different sort of activity. The first one is the operational activity, meaning providing operational support to the management of multinational clinical trials in Europe. And the second activity is the development of tools in order to facilitate the development and the conduct of this multinational trial. So we will start with the operational activity. So the main operational, the main operational activity consists of providing project management and trial coordination, the clinical study authorization in the different countries, the monitoring in the different countries, the vigilance in the different countries, and also to provide efficient and high-quality data management. So this is really the core of our activity. This is provided at non-for-profit cost, usually as a member of the consortium. Most of the projects we support are funded by the Horizon 2020. But before we provide these services, we provide also for free support in the planning of the trial, in the design of the trial. So this is for us a very strong investment because, of course, not all the trial will be funded eventually, but this is a way for us to improve the success rate of the project and also to play a driving role in some key activities related to the management of the trial. And once we have performed these activities, we also perform a risk assessment with 2 different aspects, the risk regarding the trial design and methodology, and we have a scientific board in charge of making recommendations on how best to improve the statistical or the design of the methodology of the trial, and also performing a logistical assessment and evaluating the risk related to the patient recruitment, to the budget, and to the timelines. We run currently a portfolio of about 50 trials. The mean number of countries per trial is 6 to 7. So these trials are really multinational trials. Not some of them are just run in 2 countries. The criteria to be accepted as a trial by ECRIN is the trial should be run in at least 2 ECRIN member and observer countries. But we are open, meaning that in some cases the trial are run also in other countries, and we don't want to exclude the trial with centers in the other countries. So you can see also here that the population size matters because the countries with the highest density of trial are Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. Of course, this is a matter of access to the patient, but you can see that other countries have also a significant share. And in terms of trial coordination, currently it is France, Germany, and Spain who are the more active, and we want really to promote the capacity for other countries to play the role of coordinator in these clinical trials. Regarding the funding, as I said at the beginning, is something very critical. Most of the trial we support, I would say 60-65% of the trial we support now are funded by the Horizon 2020, which is the main funding source. Some trials are funded by other mechanisms, especially by an ERANET mechanism, because in 2016, the ERANET on rare disease, the ERARE, decided to fund clinical trials. So this was for us a very interesting experience, and now we promote the idea of having an ERANET for clinical trials, meaning having every year ERANET for clinical trials. We now face a rather difficult situation because in the 2018, 19, and 20 calls, there are less calls specific for clinical trials, which raise some issues that we will have to solve anyway. Regarding the submission, you can see that ECRIN is very active because this is clearly our economic model. It doesn't mean that we are better than the other research infrastructure that are listed here, but this is really our economic model. We were involved from 2014 to 2017 in 147 submissions to the Horizon 2020, and from this, only 31 were funded, but okay, it means that the success rate is in the range of 20%, which is better than the random success rate, which is around 4%, meaning that the trial with ECRIN have a better success rate, but it is still very disappointing and very difficult, but this is part of our investment. As I said, we are also we have the mission of building tools, of establishing tools and procedures to facilitate multinational clinical trials. So you can go on the website where you can find this series of tools. I will just present the main tool. One of the major assets for ECRIN is this database where you can find all the ethical and regulatory requirements to get an authorization for clinical trials in 22 European countries, and not only the clinical trials on medicinal product, because the regulation is more or less harmonized between the different countries, but also the clinical trials on medical device and the clinical trials on nutrition. So this is something very important for us. Of course, we will have to update this content because of the new regulation on clinical trials on medicinal product, because of the new regulation on clinical trials on medical device, and because also of other aspect, especially we will improve the coverage of the pediatric trials. We have also put in place something that you can find on the website, which is a toolbox for risk-based monitoring strategy in order to select the best adapted and the cost-effective monitoring strategy. We have published some paper, some recommendation on the methodology, not that much the statistical methodology, but the design of the trial. And especially we have published 3 papers on the design of clinical trials in rare diseases, in nutrition, and in medical device. And we want to do the same. I hope we will be able to do the same with the pediatric community. This is important recommendation for the scientific communities. We have put in place a mechanism for the data center certification. Data management is one of the services we promote through our national partners. We realized that there was major discrepancy between the tools and the procedure and the quality of the data management system. So instead of developing our own data center, we decided to specify what we expected from this data center that should be compliant with the GCP, with the European regulation, with the FDA regulation. And then we started a series of audits in order to certify data centers. And we were, let's say, too successful, meaning that for us it would have been enough to have 3 or 4 data centers, but now we have 15 data centers certified in Europe, and we were asked recently by colleagues in Japan, in Korea, and so on, to certify data center in this world region. So this is what we are doing now. Another very important aspect is the data sharing. This is important for Ireland, as was mentioned by Merit, but this is important to be able to provide, let's say, recommendation on data sharing and to provide some tools to facilitate the data sharing. So what we are doing after having published this paper on recommendation is to develop some tools for data sharing, meaning templates for data sharing plans, and also probably we will go for the development of data sharing and reuse services. I mentioned, and this was mentioned also by Fionnuala, there is a pediatric project called PetCRIN, which is the latest project we are coordinating. The objective is to increase the capacity of ECRIN to manage pediatric trial, and in this project we have 3 clinical trials that are pilot pediatric trial funded, and including one coordinated by Colm O'Donnell, the POPA trial, and it will be presented just after the coffee break. So another important point is the data. You know that until now the data was not really a problem because there was some sort of bubble for the clinical trial data. The clinical trial data had to comply or have still to comply with the GCP. There should be duplication of the data collection for the purpose of the clinical trial. And now this is really a challenge because people realize that it's possible to reuse the data either from research project or from the healthcare systems. It's possible to consider reusing the data for clinical trials. So this is really a revolution, but this raises a lot of technical and a lot of regulatory and ethical and data protection issues. So we are lucky because the European Commission and the member states have launched the so-called European Open Science Cloud. And they have provided some funding. There was a call for funding called InfraEOSC 4, which is the participation of the research infrastructure in the European Open Science Cloud. And here we applied together with the other life science research infrastructure. And we are in charge of a work package where we plan to develop 3 main activities. The first one is to move further in the procedure on how to share research data and sample, meaning how to reuse the data that were collected in the context of research, either in the context of a clinical trial or in the context of a cohort. How is it possible to reuse the cohort data, for instance, to run clinical trials or to use the registry data to run clinical trials? The second aspect is something related to personalized medicine, meaning that there are now a significant number of studies that are not necessarily clinical trials, but just observational studies collecting data prospectively or retrospectively in order to analyze the data through artificial intelligence algorithm in order to stratify the patient and to identify in a way that is not hypothesis-driven, but data-driven to identify subgroup of patients. And this requires technical tools for the data management and for the data processing. And the third aspect is what I mentioned earlier, meaning that it's possible also to consider reusing the data collected not in the context of research, but in the context of the healthcare, meaning the data from the National Health Database or the electronic health record from the hospital or any other source of electronic data. How is it possible to consider reusing this data for the purpose of either observational or interventional studies? So this is what we will work on during the next few years, and with the objective of providing access to this data at the multinational level, because the hallmark of ECRIN is that we want to promote cooperation and multinational cooperation. And my last slide is about international cooperation beyond Europe, meaning that we want also to be able to provide our investigators with the capacity to run clinical trials with other countries, especially for very rare disease. It's important to be able to recruit patients in North America, in Japan, or in Australia, and so on. And for this reason, as a follow-up of the OECD initiative to facilitate international cooperation in non-commercial trials, we have developed since January 2017 this CRIG project, meaning CRIG stands for Clinical Research Initiative for Global Health. And in this project, we act as co-secretariat with the NIH. And this is split into 6 projects, one on infrastructure and funding, one on training, one on ethics, one on patient involvement, one on comparative effectiveness research, and on the, let's say, the socio-economic impact on this research, and one on regulatory awareness. We had our first meeting in Tokyo in May. HRB CRCI is one of the members of this consortium, and we also will consider, during the next teleconference, we will consider whether it makes sense to have a specific group or specific project on data. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jack, very much. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions and issues to discuss, but again, we'll try to hold them for the panel session at the end of the overall meeting.